Welcome back, listeners. Welcome back to another edition of Interventions and Detentions. I'm your host, Brad. Thanks for tuning in this week. This episode to me is really exciting because the guest that I have today, I've not met before. We've not met in person. This is the first time we're actually talking over the phone before we started this recording. I want to introduce Brian Kulak. We don't know each other. We've not met prior to this other than through Facebook and social media. And when Brian kind of reached out and said, hey, I'd like to jump on your podcast sometime. And I'm always looking for new content and new listeners and new episodes to share with my guests. So, Brian, welcome to the show. Brian is a veteran educator, author of Level Up Leadership and the Hot Seat, K-5 principal, former chief academic officer. He's super passionate about culture, connection, and human-centered leadership. And one of the topics that we kind of landed on with Brian is I've done an episode on SEL with kids, social and emotional learning with kids, but Brian said, let's talk about that with adults. So again, I'm excited to jump into this with Brian today and help him lead us through that adult SEL conversation. But Brian, before we jumped in, get us a little background. Tell us about who you are, what got you here to the other side of the microphone today.
Hey, Brad, thanks again for having me on. We've been going back and forth, and I think we both we kind of committed to a patient approach to each other's busy schedules. So
absolutely,
I love doing stuff like this. I just did one a couple of weeks ago, so really honored to be here. So, yeah, my path is as straightforward as you can get, and I tell people all the time that it's not one that you should probably emulate because I started my path to education at 14. And a quick story, I was writing at that time a pre-SAT essay. It's called the HSPA back then. And I wrote it about Isaiah Thomas, the point guard from the Detroit Pistons back in the 90s. I was obsessed with Zeke and the Pistons, and I wore number 11 and all the things. But the prompt was, if you could trade places with anybody in the world, who would it be and why? So I chose that, wrote it, and then about a week later, the head of the department came in and cold read it without me knowing. And I was sitting near the back. And as she read it and beamed and talked about what a great piece it was for a 14-year-old, I just said to myself, well, this is it. I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to be a coach, and this is it. And I never deviated from that path. So my path was very straightforward, but it gets better. So at the end of my student teaching experience, I got a call from both the basketball coach and my mentor, my hero, who said, listen, I'm being pressed into action and guidance. I have to leave the classroom, and I want you to take over. All you need to do is get through your student teaching and the job is yours. And it was almost like a Netflix, docu-series, or it could not be happening this way, but it did. And I got to teach in the class that I kind of formed my opinion about what a great teacher is because of him. Wow. So I took over his schedule and then never looked back. 15 years in the classroom teaching seniors mostly, English class. And then I ran the newspaper, so journalism class. And that was all at my alma mater here in New Jersey. And then I started getting the itch after 15 years and went to grad school and then joined Ed Leadership 11 years ago. The first 4, I was chief academic officer. Most people call that assistant superintendent or curriculum instruction, all that stuff. That's what we called it here. And then for the last 8, I've been the proud principal of elementary school here in New Jersey called Tatum. We are K-5 public. We are the Tigers, and our motto is we are all connected, which I assume we're going to get into a little bit here. So yeah, that's my direct, straightforward. I can do nothing else in this world. I can't hammer a nail. I can't change oil, but I can do the education game. So that's how I got here.
Well, what a great background and an experience that led you here today. And I appreciate you sharing that background as we get started here. You talked right away about connection. Your leadership work centers on that connection and culture. So before we dig in real deep, what's grounding you in your work right now with connection?
Yeah. So it's an easy, simplistic answer, but I have 5 brand new teachers in my building. So I call them the starting 5, kind of keeping with that basketball motif from a minute ago. But they're all young. They are learning their way. And so what's grounding me is my coaching of them. So it's not to say that I'm not spending time with my veterans. My staff is incredibly talented, super hardworking. We always talk about in interviews how Tatum is a place you can't hide because people work so hard. But I really am working as hard as I can with the starting 5, as best as I can, giving them as much feedback, positive reinforcement as I can, just to make sure they feel connected and grounded in their own work, expecting the bumps that come when you're 22 or 23, and assuring them that they belong. This is the place where they're supposed to be, with me and with our staff and our community. So that's been the focus of the first few months of my work, because we did not expect that level of turnover, but retirements got us and some other people moved on to different positions in the district. So it's been exciting. I've been really enjoying, kind of reinvigorated by the idea of a bunch of new kids on staff, because I haven't had that in the first 8 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. And to have so many at once, like how big is your school, like staff
Yeah.
wise, kid wise?
Yeah, we're only about 250, Brad. We're the biggest in our district, but we're only 250. We're the only building in the district that has 2 classrooms per grade level. So we're about 250 kids. We got about 30 staff, including aides and lunch crew. So it's not real big, but for us, it's big here in our little kind of nook in South Jersey.
Yeah.
So I can spend, and I honestly, the size dictates that I should have an intimate awareness of all the kids, the families, and the staff, because there's no excuse not to with a school our size.
Right. Well, and I really love that you're building that connection and culture with the young teachers to carry on the torch, so to speak, because you, like you said, you might not have a high turnover rate, but that's kind of what schools all across the United States are dealing with right now. So you don't want to lose that young energy by any means. So whatever you can do to support them and keep them, that's going to be huge. I think you're doing a great, sounds like a great job of laying that foundation for them to be successful and to stay in it, because it's like, I've got a daughter that just graduated from Purdue University in kinesiology. She'd make a great teacher, and she substitutes from time to time. But honestly, I tell you, like, I don't go into education because it's not a great thing these days. Unfortunately, we could have a whole episode just on that probably, but that's awesome that you're supporting those new teachers, and it sounds like definitely building them up for success, especially when it comes to SEL. So let's kind of dig into that now. You started out as an English and journalism teacher before becoming a principal. Talk about the experiences early in your career that shaped how you view those relationships and that emotional intelligence with your staff.
Yeah, it's a layup question that we couldn't have predicted, because it ties together so nicely with my second book, which you mentioned, called The Hot Seat. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about.
Yeah, please do.
It's a perfect segue. So I started at 22, Brad. I didn't know what I was doing. I had 4 preps. I had 3 grade levels. I was barely 4 years older than the kids that I was teaching, including my brother and his band of merry idiot friends. So it was a tough go when I first started. And what I realized pretty quickly is that the headway I was making with my students was not based in the curriculum, but on the connections that we made with each other. And I had some cred because I was a hometown kid, right? People knew who I was. I was an athlete, and it was a very small school. So it was very much big fish, small pond. But I think that really helped me. So pretty quickly, I realized that if I could figure out a way to connect with the kids, that would help them connect with their work and their world, which was changing, especially for my seniors, who I miss teaching so terribly all the time. And the seniors were the kind of hallmark of my teaching career. So pretty early in that first year, this is all in the book, but I underplanned, and I finished a novel study on a Thursday. I had nothing for Friday, as well as anybody, that Fridays are typically quiz and test day. I wasn't a good planner, and we were finished. And so I had to kind of scramble, and I decided that what was missing, I would argue probably still is missing from a lot of the English curriculum, is public speaking. So I created this on the fly, this quick activity called the hot seat. I put a chair in front of the room, and I came up with like 15 guiding questions that had nothing to do with anything academic. It was all about the life affirming qualities, about who we are, who we were, where we're going. And I just challenged kids to answer them. So I'll give you an example. One of the first questions that one of the first seniors, this is 1999, got was, who means more to you, mom or dad?
Ooh.
So, without even, and again, it was so misguided really in the beginning, because I didn't know what the relationship with the kid and the family had, but she dove right in. And the next thing you knew, we were having these conversations as close to grown-ups as you can, 17, 18 years old, every Friday. So when I felt like I was, mired in red tape, or I was struggling with keeping kids connected to, let's say, I don't know, medieval poetry or whatever we were studying at the time, I knew I could fall back on the human quality of of education, which really should be what we all use as our North Star. I think a lot of us are getting farther and farther away from it. So to answer your question in a really long-winded way, when I joined leadership, I was like, wait a minute, these are just kids growing up, man. They're still adults. They still have the same concerns and fears and dreams and all those things. So I tapped into that. And the first thing I said to my staff as a principal is, I need you more than you need me. And we all know it. So instead of going in and flexing and parking in a parking spot and making sure that people knew I was the boss, I went completely the other way and just deferred and asked questions and visited classrooms and praised and learned how to build a culture that was already kind of, I don't know, left for me. I inherited this amazing crew, but there was so much more I could do with it. So that's where adults SEL came to me. We have to do the SEL with the kids, but then for some reason, there's not the same mandate to think about our staffs that way. So I chose to make that my goal.
Yeah. And I love that because I think we're a lot alike in that way. Like to me, relationships are so important, whether it's with your students, your staff, parents, whatever. And if you don't have those strong relationships, you don't have buy-in, you don't have credibility, you don't have authenticity. And that's just so huge that you built that. And I love how you started out with, I need you guys more than you need me. And I don't think we tell staff that enough,
I agree.
Or kids for that matter,
I agree.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So when did you realize that adult SEL piece wasn't just important, but really essential?
Well, I think I would pretty much right away, Brad, because one of the first things we did after I made clear that I was in this sort of deferential mode in year one is I just kind of focused all our PD, all our staff meetings on as little red tape as I could get away with and just culture building. So when I started to kind of meet with the staff and learn more about them, a couple of them had invited me to lunch in the summer. So I met with a couple teacher leaders in the summer to get a sense. Now, at that time, I was in a district position, so I knew about Tatum. Everyone knew about Tatum. It was a wonderful school led by this woman named Jen McPartland, who has since retired and was a great mentor of mine. But it wasn't enough for me to know that. I had to figure out how to continue it, right? Sometimes winning the first championship is the easy part. It's repeating that's hard. So that's what I was kind of focused on. So as I heard from, each of the staff members about what Jen did well and what our superintendent at the time did really well, another great leader named Scott Oswald out here in New Jersey, I just started to kind of curate all the things that I was hearing into what I could package into these bite-sized either email messages or beginning and end, bookend staff meeting things that we did to culture build. And then some of it just became really, really powerful. I'll give you a really good example that I hope the listeners would consider. There's a great video called This is Water. And it's a produced video that's set to a much longer graduation speech given by the late American writer David Foster Wallace, who kind of blew up and then unfortunately took his own life. But the purpose of the video and the speech was to remind us that we're not the most important thing in everyone's universe, only our own. So when I showed the video the first time at a staff meeting and it ended, there was just like palpable quiet. And then there were some tears. And I was like, okay, well, this can go one of two ways. Either I really misfired here and this is a terrible idea, or I can open it up and say, let's talk about this video. And ultimately what we talked about as a staff is we really can't do anything without each other. So it might sound like an understatement or something that's so obvious, but unless you call it out loud and then put it into practice, it's really just lip service. So I use This is Water all the time, and I started using it as part of my interview process, Brad. So go through the interview, you're a finalist, I send you the video, and I just say, next time I see you, I want to talk about the video. So there's no more questions about pedagogy or instructional practice. It's I want to know who you are as a human, right? Because I think that I can teach teaching. I can't teach being a good human. I can't teach being a reflective person who is full of empathy and self-awareness. And that's the kind of people I want on my staff and that I've hired. So that's where this all came from. It's just like, how do I build this really good staff that takes care of each other and takes care of the kids, and that I'm like an afterthought. Like I want to be as, in the background as possible. Right. And that's kind of what we built over the last 8 years.
Wow. That's awesome, dude. I'm loving this. And now I'm like, I don't have a pen in front of me, but I got to remember the waters. I got to write this down.
Yeah, This is Water. Yeah.
This is water. I want to use that. That's awesome. So, taking care of the adults and their SEL, what happens to the students when we ignore that? What do you see with kids if we don't continue to focus on, not only their SEL, but the adults as well?
Yeah, what a great question. I mean, I think that you're probably like me, Brad, that when you walk into a building, you can feel energy like a smack in the face. And I'm
Absolutely.
not just talking about education. I can walk into a concert and get the feel of what the crowd's going to be like that night, or a game, or wherever I am. I just am such a big energy person. So when I was in my last position, that chief academic officer, every time I came to Tatum, it was bright and welcoming and warm, and you could not deny it.
Hmm.
But the same can be true of other schools. And I'm sure you've been in them where it's cold and literally cold and
Yeah.
dank, and you have to go find somebody to tell you where to go. And there's just not a lot of smiling. And of course, that's going to rub off on the kids. So we feel like our SEL platform, both for the adults and the kids, is modeled every day. So whether sometimes I'll concoct it. I'll say, listen, I'm going to come in your room at 1 o'clock and say, you know what, I just want to say in front of your students, her name's Miss Olson, let's say, I saw what you did downstairs. No one was watching you. I'm so proud that you're on our staff. I'm just so thankful that you're on our team. And then I'll just walk out.
Yeah.
So the kids don't know that we might have set that up, but we also just do it by way of, happenstance. They'll hear us talk to each other in a way that's kind and supportive. So even if we are dealing with their own adult stuff, which again is just kid stuff grown up, right? The
Yep.
kids see it and they feel it. And so they feel more both empowered to ask for help and then able to use that help. And even whether it's a 5-year-old brain or an 11-year-old brain, they'll see us do it. And so they'll emulate that. And I don't think you can overstate the importance of that as a culture builder, because you're right. We could love on the kids all we want, but they'll figure out if we do not make eye contact in the hallway, or we don't high five each other, or we don't thank each other or shout each other out on our PA system, right? All those things are such easy lift things to do that goes so far for the kids and the adults, because the goal then, Brad, is these kids grow up to be bigger versions of what we tried to, kind of create in elementary school, which I think helps our middle and our high school.
Yep. And the timing of this is awesome, Brian, because I don't know if you caught my episode last week, but it was called The Adults in the Room.
Oh, yeah.
And it was very focused on our adult behavior. So this episode is just lining up so nicely, because one of the things I talked about last week were how kids are mirrors of us.
Yeah.
So what we bring into the classroom, into the school building that day, good or bad, kids are going to emulate that. They're going to mirror it. They're going to, they're going to either act out like we are, or they're going to be, having a great day like we are. So it lines up, what we bring in, they're going to show, they're going to reflect. And I feel like we forget that a lot of times as adults. We can either make or break our day, honestly.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
It's all a choice, man. And again, I want to be clear that adults are allowed to have bad days, right?
Absolutely.
Guy once said to me, I really, really respect, he said, the problem with teaching is you're on stage 7 hours a day. You're not allowed to be tired, sad, hungry. You have to push through. And it's such a challenging, job in all ways, right? So even if we are giving our students 70% of ourselves, that's way more than they might be getting at home. And that's the back end piece of this, is those 7 hours we spend with them might be the safest, happiest, cleanest, most fed 7 hours they get. So we kind of owe it to them to honor all of that by honoring each other.
Right. So how do you respond to maybe staff, or even could be parents in your building? Like when we talk about SEL with the adults, like I've had pushback from
Sure.
people in my building, like, oh, this is just psycho mumbo jumbo. That's not, SEL is not a real thing. It's just fluff. It's more of an initiative. But you and I both know it's a real thing. And like I focus a lot of training with my staff on ACEs with kids.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, I can still remember, and I talked about this in an earlier episode, when I first learned about ACEs and I was going through those 10 questions, and I got through about number 6, and a kid just instantly came into my mind, like, oh my gosh, he's probably, answered yes to 3 or 4 of these questions, and he's at a high level of trauma, and this is why he acts the way he does, because he can't deal with these things.
Yeah.
And I even want adults to, ask themselves those same 10 ACEs questions, because sometimes I think we forget that even as adults, as a child, we went through some of those same traumas, depending on our background. So how do you respond to those people when they say, yeah, that's not a real thing, SEL, it's just fluff? Like, what's your comeback?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's become a pretty stock comeback for me, and it also is very limited. I don't know if it's because of where we live, the political climate in New Jersey. I really don't know what it is, but the SEL detractors are so few and far between, which is wonderful. But my answer is always this: just imagine you didn't eat all night last night. In fact, you didn't eat for the last day and a half, or let's imagine that you didn't sleep all night, and then you come into your work environment and your boss says, I need that blah, blah, blah on my desk in the next hour. You are not at your best, but you have to do it because that's your job. That's what you have to do to put food on the table or whatever. But the same applies for kids. Like if you have a kid who clearly hasn't slept or just got his butt kicked by his alcoholic father, and then it's 9 o'clock and you're like, all right, guys, we're going to do our math lesson right now. That kid is never going to learn math at that time or maybe ever. So my response to SEL being fluff is it's actually not fluff as much as it's mandatory. I know one of the things we talked about in the pre-show is like, why is this stuff not mandatory? It has to be because we have to teach the human before we teach the subjects. Again, a mentor of mine once said, whenever somebody asks me what I teach, he says kids, not a subject area. And I think that's the hallmark. That's the foundation of SEL. It's not an initiative, man. It's a way of life. It's the best way for kids to learn, to make sure they feel safe and regulated, whether you're using ACEs or zones of regulation or emojis or, inside out, whatever, cartoon characters. Yep. They have to be able to identify how they're feeling. And then we have to adapt to that on the way to them learning, because learning we expect to happen at all times during the day, but it absolutely is not. Just like you and I are not productive, let's say at 2:30 when we need a cup of coffee and we're so tired or we just got beaten up by a parent or a superintendent or whatever, we have to go back to what we can do to ground ourselves and make ourselves ready to be the best we can be as leaders. And the same goes for kids. And I think we've gotten more buy-in because parents are like, yeah, you're right. I don't know how to get through to my kid. My kid's really struggling in blank. Okay, well, let's get him in school. And we have a crew of people who can help, myself, our wellness team, whoever the case may be. But I guarantee you, parent, we're not going to force your kid to read until we know that he is ready to learn on that day, whether it takes, 10 minutes or an hour. It's just not negotiable.
Right. Well, we talked about kids being mirrors for the teachers, and I think teachers are then mirrors of us as leaders, and modeling that emotional intelligence is such a big thing. And we'll even call it emotional, EQ, emotional intelligence.
Yeah, of course.
We have to model that and show it. Talk about a time when you as a principal, as a leader, had to model, being vulnerable or maybe some emotional regulation, whether it was with a kid, a parent, a teacher. I'll let you kind of pick, but talk about a time when you had to just model that through that experience.
Yeah, I think so many come to mind because I think I'm probably more open and self-aware than most people in our position. I think especially men. But two things come to mind. I have wicked anxiety, Brad. I mean, that's kind of who I am, and I didn't know what it was or how to handle it until my 30s. And it wasn't until like medication and therapy that I really started to understand how my mind works. Now I totally understand how my mind has worked all this time. So rather than keep that as a secret or try to figure out or have my staff figure out when I'm feeling anxious, I just told them straight up, this is something I have to work through all the time. I have way more tools than I had, when I first started teaching, but, it explained sleeplessness in college or when I first started teaching. It explained like repetition of things or song lyrics getting stuck in my head because it's something I can control. That's all part of the anxiety brain. But I think it was important for them to know that. So I told them. And then when I got divorced about 3 years ago, and when it was clear that it was going to happen, I didn't tell them then. I told them 3 months later. And my message to them was like, I'm okay. And I wanted you to see this version of me as opposed to the version that you probably saw as kind of broken down while I was going through it. So I think there is certainly a boundary that has to be in place between leaders and staff. But I think if you are leaning toward the human and away from the sort of robotic, bureaucratic, you're going to do better and you're going to feel better about who you are as a leader and as a person. And I think then your staff in particular is going to feel like you're a guy or a woman that they can go to. Like, I'm going through this thing at home, or I'm going through this thing with my kid. I'm older than most of my staff. I've been through a lot more in education and life. So I think they come to me as a mentor as well. And what better way to lead than to have them trust in you as a person, not just as like a pedagogical leader or God forbid, a manager who's just checking boxes. I just refuse to do it, Brad. I just wanted them to know, who I am and what my warts are so that they can see that I'm still capable and hopefully thriving as a leader, despite the things that I struggle with, which is all, again, based on, the tenets of SEL.
Yeah. Well, that vulnerability goes so far. And I love that you're opening up to your staff and just sharing those things with them. And, kind of leading off that, what misconceptions do we as leaders have about, being strong, quote unquote,
Yeah.
versus being emotionally in tune?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think it's fleeting, but there's still a narrative in society that, the leader has to be. That word strong, I think, has taken on so many different incarnations over the years. But being strong as a show of masculinity, let's say, or an imperviousness to flaws or trauma or anxiety, depression, whatever the case may be, is disingenuous. And it does not tie into what we're talking about in this episode. And what, I think is so important about our leadership is that those things are going to happen. So in my strength, I would hope, is illustrated by my vulnerability and say, I need help. I need a day. I need you to take this on for me. I just can't do it right now. As opposed to pushing through, not being communicative with my staff or my secretary in particular, who reads my sort of moods better than anybody. She knows exactly what's going on when I walk in the building every day. So my strength is in vulnerability as opposed to this faux, I don't know I guess again, this faux masculinity that I come in, I bang my chest, we're going to do things my way, despite what might be going on in my life or yours. And frankly, Brad, what's happening in our world, in our country, is not helping. Like if we try to push through all that and pretend like nothing's going on that's affecting us, I think that's a disingenuous leader that they're going to see through, just like the kids would if the teachers were that way. So I'm not going to negotiate that.
Yeah. And you talked a little bit about this and gave a couple of brief examples about, things that we can do as leaders to, support and care for our staff. So, what are some things that you regularly do to support teacher well-being in your building?
Yeah. So the first thing I do is every Monday they get what we call the Monday mailer, which at the top of which is like, hope you had a nice weekend, and some sort of quip about the Eagles game because we're, from the Philly area, or the weather changing, some generic, that's not my favorite part, but I do it to start it. Then it's the nuts and bolts of the week. Here's what to expect. Here's where I'll be on Tuesday. If you need me, I'll be out of the building. But then the bottom, I actually started using a sneaker emoji to preface that part, because last year I decided to start wearing sneakers every day. I stopped dressing up. So now I am casually dressed, professional casually, but I have a bad knee from sports, and I just felt like I needed to make a change that was more in line with self-care and making sure I could stay on my feet. So that the sneaker emoji kind of reminds them that I want them to think about themselves for themselves too. And that then is going to be a quote from somebody like Adam Grant, who is like my oracle. I believe in pretty much everything Adam Grant said. He's an organizational psychologist at Penn out here on the East Coast, and he has a podcast, and he's connected to everything, and everything he says I think is gospel. So it might be something he said. It might be a funny meme I saw that speaks to our world or our culture or our kids, but it's always just like this affirming, we are so much more than the bullet points that preceded this that are just about our nuts and bolts. So that's one thing. Every staff meeting ends with a shout out. Sounds pretty simplistic, but when I ask staff to think meaningfully about each other instead of themselves, and then say it out loud and then clap, it just brings together, and it ends the meeting on such a high note, regardless of whatever the bullet points we have to get through in the staff meeting are. And we're talking about people and ourselves in just such a congratulatory, kind, empathetic way, that I just think that's a great way for us to end what are dictated, mandated staff meetings each month. And then I'll do a silly prize once a month. So one staff meeting is nuts and bolts and one is culture building. So like one time do you know the board game Apples to Apples, where it's like a noun and then there's adjectives? You know that board game?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So we did that where everybody got a card, and then three further cards that you had to assign to a colleague. And then the colleagues had to guess who gave them these wonderful adjectives. So if the adjective was hardworking, you gave it to me, I would have to guess that Brad gave it to me. And then the fun part was whether it was true or not, it didn't matter because the adjective is the same. So those things are peppered in throughout the course of the year. And then I'll do things like, I'll read something or I'll see something online that I think is important for us to think about as a staff. So I found one called the still face experiment, which goes back to the 80s. And basically it's just a mom smiling with her 1.5-year-old. And then she turns around, and when she comes back around, she refuses to smile or acknowledge the kid. And the kid starts to act out, cry, do all these things because he doesn't understand why mom has changed. So we talked about what our faces say about us. We talked about what our kids' faces say about us. So it's all those things that just, I think, are more important than don't forget your SGOs, don't forget your PDPs, like all that stuff that no one wants to hear about that does not help build up our culture. I just kind of prioritize for our staff.
All the acronyms in education.
Oh my gosh, please go away.
I know, right? Well, and kind of right aligned with that, obviously we have to have accountability as leaders and staff.
Of course.
And, that's the part of the job that I dislike the most, I think. I love spending time in classrooms. I hate writing evaluations.
Yep.
I love giving feedback. I hate scripting the evaluation, all that stuff. But how do you balance as a leader that accountability piece, but also the empathy piece as well?
Yeah, I think the accountability piece is the piece that's the least human in our field, right? Like you have to do SGOs, you have to do PDPs, I have to do KPIs, I have a boss who tells me to do things that are based on the data. But the balance is that, scatter plots tell us such a small or paint such a small picture of our students that if we don't do the extra requisite work to figure out who they are as tiny humans, then we're doing a disservice. So the balance is, I will spend time in my office with the door closed, rarely, but when I do, like today, it's a great example, from 1 to 3, and actually 1 till I left for this call, I was finishing up my 504s, and that took me 2 hours. I have so many that it took me 2 hours. Wow. I don't love it, but while I'm doing it, I'm thinking of the kid that I'm creating these accommodations for to make sure that he or she is successful. So I know I have to do it, and on the back end, it's going to help the kid, but to offset that, I made sure that I spend a lot of time in kindergarten, because whenever you get overwhelmed as a leader, go to kindergarten and the world changes, right? It's just so fun and curious and silly down there. So I went down to kindergarten to offset that. I made sure that we did some gratitude grams this week because of Thanksgiving coming up. So I wrote out gratitude grams and made sure I put them in the mailboxes of the folks who I wanted to get them for me. I made sure I checked in on my starting 5. I did the things that fill my cup, knowing that at 1 o'clock, that door is going to have to shut, and I got to get through some of the red tape stuff. So you just have to be intentional about it, just like anything else. If I don't put it on my calendar or put it in my brain, it's not going to happen. I'm going to get stuck in my office for hours.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thinking of culture now, and again, we as leaders, part of our job is to monitor, measure that. How do you do that in your building? How do you keep a pulse on that culture?
Yeah, another good question. So one thing I started doing about 5 years ago is I take 2 of the mandatory staff meetings that we just talked about, and I'll run through the bullet points. I won't put anything at the end for us to connect, and I just leave. And I allow them to have their own sort of session led by a teacher leader to talk through things that are bugging them about the district or me or, initiatives or our curriculum. And then one teacher who, usually nominates herself will come in and schedule time with me to talk through it. And that has created such emotional security. Now, I don't think we really needed it, Brad, to be honest with you, but there's no reason not to offer it anyway. So once in the winter and once in the spring, that will happen. I will make sure that they have time together to really just vent. And especially for the starting 5, I want them to hear it's okay to complain. It's okay to ask for help, even if it's about me, because I think I've established that, again, I'm self-aware enough. I know I have lots of flaws. I have lots of room to grow, that I won't know exactly how to do that unless they are providing that to me. And I think that's a really important piece. We also started doing this thing called think tanks, which is not revolutionary, but I just offered one Thursday a month where we just come together. It's almost like an ed camp PD style thing where, hey, I have this thing I want to share with you. Come and go as you please, but I think it might be fun for you guys to listen to this. And it's not me, it's led by staff. So we had mentioned AI earlier before the call. Well, I have a 5th grade teacher who's a master at it. And the teachers who weren't doing it and were afraid of it were like, oh my God, he's a young guy. He's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I can do all this stuff with the click of a couple keystrokes using ChatGPT. So again, just like honoring each other's expertise, because one thing I learned in my last role, Brad, is that homegrown PD is where it's at. I mean, I know we have a budget, and I had the budget. I had to go find expensive speakers and expensive programs to come in and talk to us. But ultimately, it is that ed camp, vote with 2 feet, learn from each other model that I think has served education the best. And so that's kind of what we do at our school is let's learn from each other as opposed to me just kind of pushing out agenda items or procedures and protocols that I think are important because they're really not.
Yeah, I call that the experts among us. We
I
have
love
so
it.
many in our buildings, right? And we don't tap into them or we don't think about that enough. And I think sometimes when we just kind of sit back and reflect, like, oh my gosh, if you would just come talk to or just have a session, say, hey guys, I want to talk about Chat GPT or whatever it is I'm a guru in. It's amazing how we can glean things from one another and save money and save time. Just lean on each other a little bit more, both academically, but also socially to fit into that SEL stuff. And going to kind of wind down with one more heavy question before we get into some fun things and wrap this up. When that culture slips, gets fractured, how do you rebuild it in your building? You've got so many ideas of how to start it, support it along the way, but it's going to happen and probably has where, you have a blow up or an argument or, teacher doesn't feel supported. How do you rebuild that and get it back to where it was?
Yeah, it's funny because this happened in my class. So I think I just borrowed from myself, 25 years ago. But I remember I had a class of juniors and it just wasn't working, Brad. They weren't vibing with me. I was not doing what they needed to do. It wasn't a fun environment. And I'll never forget, we had a fire drill that interrupted another like poor lesson by me. And when we came back, there was this like pall over the class and I could tell that it was time. So I said, you know what? Our class got interrupted anyway. I think we need to talk. And I think I need to hear from you. So I remember this kid, Anthony, sat in the back. He was real outspoken and he and I became really close, probably as a result of this. But him and this other kid, Dave, just kind of laid out what I guess the class had been talking about during the fire drill. Like they were actively talking about like what wasn't working. And honestly, it wasn't petulant. It wasn't like teenage nonsense. It was valuable feedback for like a 23-year-old kid who was just trying to get through the day. And I thanked them for it. And then we just kind of moved on with some new ideas about instructional models. Like they thought I was doing too much. It was an honors class and they were bored. And I was appalled. Like at that point in my career, I was like, I know the stuff. You don't know the stuff. I'm going to give it to you. But they did. They were capable of so much more. And they just said they thought it was an environment that they could do more in. They want to do more group work, yada, yada. And I just felt like at that time I had a decision to make. Again, we just talked about this, but do I puff my chest out and say it's my way, the highway, and this will be reflected in your grade? Or do I say, thank you, I'm going to think about this, I'm going to get better? That's what I did. And so from that moment forward, I thought about that conversation every year with all my kids. And the same thing goes with my grownups now, right? So of course, I know when things aren't going well. I know when it's me. I know when it's the district. I know when turnover is happening or there's a contract squabble or whatever. I just refuse to bury my head in the sand. So what I typically do, Brad, is I have a really strong group of teacher leaders that are tapped into pretty much everything. So one is named Heather. I want Heather to be a principal more than anything, but she's not going to do it, but she'd be great. So if I know things are going wonky, I will call her in. I'm just, all right, tell me what's going on and how do I address it? So, and she tells me, but that all comes from, you can't do that if it's so far after the fact, you've built no capacity for those kind of conversations and you hit somebody with it. No one's going to be forthcoming with you. No one's going to be honest, especially when they know they got to call you out. When I've said something wrong or one of my ideas flopped or I have to kind of answer to what's happening at the district level, which might not be received well, or it's again, a union thing. All these things are my responsibility, but if I don't know what's happening, I can't address it. They have to be able to tell me. So head it off at the pass, get it in early with people you trust, and then let that person be the mouthpiece for the rest of the staff because they say, okay, well, if Heather talked to him and it went this way, I think we're going to be okay. I think we can move forward with it. And then I will address it in a staff meeting or an email, whatever the case may be. But you can't bury your head in the sand, man, especially if it's about you. You have to be able to be ready for that kind of feedback and then get better.
Take the ownership, man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's another part of being vulnerable as leaders don't want to do that sometimes, but it goes so far in building that trust and respect with your staff. If we're not perfect and we're not going to do
No.
everything right. We're not going to say everything right. We're not going to handle every situation right, but
Yep.
we do our best. And if we let teachers and staff know, I think they understand and they like to see that, a vulnerability and ownership of, hey, I messed up. I'm going to do it different next time. And I appreciate your feedback. So I love that.
Yeah. I mean, how many people want a micromanager, Brad? Do people like go into an interview and say, "Hey, are you a micromanager who will not let me breathe? I
Right.
can't wait to work for you." That just, it's not real, like I don't get it. So I just won't do it.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
love it. Hey, we're going to jump into my
Yep.
favorite part of the episode. It's rapid fire question time. I don't know how many we're going to get through. I've got
Okay.
lots of them here. So I don't want you to think a lot about them. Just,
Okay.
whatever pops in your head first. So the very first question, and I'm going to preface it with, you can't use level up or hot seat. What is a book every educator should read?
Let's see. The I think the one that I like the most and led me to this cultural journey is a book called The 4 O'Clock Faculty. It's a book by a guy named Rich Chiz out here in New Jersey. And it kind of speaks to everything we talked about, where most of the stuff that really happens in a really positive way in his metaphor happens at 4 o'clock. It happens when everybody's leaving, everybody's gone, and there's time for private conversations and time for planning and time for heart to hearts or those vetting sessions. And I learned so much from that book. He and I became really close friends. Actually, I know you said I couldn't mention it, but he wrote the foreword to my first book because I just think he's so brilliant. I think he's on book 3 now. Just Autopilot just came out. So check that out. It just gives you real practical ways to remind yourself that we are a faculty that probably does more for each other in the dark after hours than the hectic, 7 hours that we're together.
Right on. What's the most underrated trait in a great principal?
Empathy. It's not even close. And I think we've gotten too far away from it. I think we've forgotten what it means to be sad or elated or human. So that's it. If you're not empathetic, you're in the wrong field.
Absolutely. What's your go-to drink order during a tough week?
So I am a huge seasonal craft beer guy. So I just had this conversation yesterday. I love the fall, but the fall beers are going away. So now we're going to move into our winter, our stouts and our porters. So I will indulge responsibly, Brad, moving into the winter.
I love it. What is your go-to rock out song?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think you probably did some research. I'm a huge Pearl Jam guy. That's my band. I will not be, love a lot of bands, but there's so many great Pearl Jam songs. I think one that is super underrated is called Hold On. It's from a album called Lost Dogs. It's a bunch of B-sides.
Yep.
It's a great rock out song, and that's one that's in my constant rotation.
How many times have you seen them in concert?
More than I can count. And
Really?
I'm
Awesome.
really worried that now that Matt Cameron is left from behind the drum kit, that they're going to go in a different direction. So every time could be the last.
Yeah. I'm a huge Foo Fighters fan. I've only seen them once, and now that Taylor Hawkins is gone, it's like, I don't know that I want to go see him. And all these bands, like, I don't know how old you are, but I know we're probably not too far off in age. I'm an 80s kid, early 90s music. All those bands that I would love to go see, the Motley Crues, the AC/DCs, I'm like, I don't know that I want to go listen to them because I don't want to be tainted on how great they sounded in the 80s versus.
That's true. And they're all doing these tours, Brad. Like they're all doing these reunion tours. And I've been loading up. I'll be honest with you. I've seen a lot of old bands recently because they're on their 25th or 30th reunion. And I hear you. You don't want to like sully what you thought of them in the 80s and 90s, but I love live music more than anything. So I'll go. Yeah,
I'm with you on that. What's your favorite snack to steal from the staff lounge?
I'm a huge trail mix guy, especially if it has M&Ms in it. Little hit of chocolate with all those nuts. I'm in. That's me.
Nice. All right. Walkthroughs or hallway duty?
Walkthroughs.
Why?
I think that there's more to be gained from even the verbiage of it not being a duty, because it means it's my choice to have done it, and I'd rather spend more time doing things that I want to do with my staff than something I'm forced to do.
Gotcha. Spirit Day outfit. We have a lot of these in elementary schools. Do you go in all in full commitment or bare minimum?
No, I really don't. I think I should probably get better at this, to be honest with you. I do not go all in. Typically, it is something athletic when we're doing Spirit Days. I still play baseball 8 months a year. So I usually just wear my uniform and let kids, kind of, I don't know, ask questions about my playing. So I don't do as much as I probably could because I want the kids to be the focus, not me.
Nice. What's one word that describes your leadership style today?
today. So I read Let Them over the summer, and while I think there's lots in there that is kind of nonsense, I have started to take a lot of what she said in that book. So I think this year I have been more adaptive than I ever have before.
Nice. All right, let's wind this down, buddy, because we're shooting at 44 minutes already. Brian, I could talk to you all night long.
Same.
I
Yeah.
love this. I think we have a lot in common, and I'm hoping we've budded a little bit of a friendship here. And
This is not the last time we'll talk, for sure.
Awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
And I know I
Yeah.
got to go out and buy some books this week. So,
Yeah.
as we wind down and as we close this out, if a school leader that's listening wants to improve adult SEL starting tomorrow, what's the first step?
Ask the staff. What do you need from me to make us better, and how can I make that happen for us? And then go from there. If you try to do it without the buy-in, then that is your vision, not theirs.
I love it. What's one more thing that you hope leaders remember from this conversation today?
I think that we're all flawed, and if we don't accept that, then we are not being honest with ourselves and our staff, and it will be seen through very easily.
Nice. Hey, Brian, thank you so much. Just talking about adult SEL, I'm glad you brought up the topic when you approached me like, hey, let's talk about this. Let's get it on your podcast, because I focus a lot on the kids and just, school in general, but we forget about the other adults in the building sometimes. So we got to take care of our staff.
Yeah.
That SEL piece is so important, and it's not fluff. It's not optional. We got to keep it in the forefront. I appreciate you jumping on here today. Where can listeners find out more about Brian?
Yeah, it's a great question. So over at briankulak.net, where my blog, references to my books, Level Up Leadership and The Hot Seat. My consultation stuff is on there. And then actually, Brad, this might be good for you down the line. So I host every Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on Instagram, The Hot Seat Live. So basically, the first story I told about The Hot Seat way back in 1999, I bring it to 2025 with former students and really anybody who is an interesting person. So if you ever want to hop on, I'd love to have you on, and we'll kind of flip the roles and you can be in the hot seat. But that's every Thursday night on Instagram. And then obviously I'm really active on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So you can find me there. And then Brian Kulak 11 at Gmail for anybody who wants to ask direct questions or has questions about the books or consultation.
Awesome. And I'll try to include all that in the social media descriptions when I drop this episode on Friday, so people can easily access you. Dude, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed this. I wish you were closer. I might have to make a trip out to Jersey sometime. I love visiting other schools and meeting other principals. And
please do.
Never been out east before, past Philadelphia. So
yeah.
I mean, that's not too far away. I can get out there and see you sometime.
We're 10 minutes from Philly. My school's 10 minutes from Philly. So you get out here, you're going to be a guest of honor.
Awesome. I'll take you up on it, and I will take you up on your Thursday hot seat invite real soon. I would love to do that.
Cool.
Hey, thanks again, Brian. We might even have to get you back on another episode sometime because, again, I think we could just talk and talk and talk. So
I love it. Thanks for having me, Brad. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. Hey, folks, thanks again for tuning in this week. We'll be coming at you. We're leading up into Thanksgiving next week. We've got a couple more episodes to jump out before Christmas time, so just keep tuning in every week. This is Interventions and Detentions. I'm Brad, and don't forget, this is where the real learning begins. See you next week.